Today on Reparations in Action.
Our truest interest is in genuine solidarity with African people and the people on the planet Earth. Because as Chairman Omali Yeshitela describes it, the African Revolution is about the liberation of all oppressed and colonized peoples.
You're listening to Reparations in Action.
Reparations now!
Uhuru. You're listening to the Reparations in Action podcast and FM radio show, The White Lies Shattered series. My name is Jamie Simpson. Reparations in Action is a program of white solidarity with Black power. We believe reparations to African people is the key question of our times and is one that demands action on the part of European or white people. As always, we'd like to salute Black Power 96, where this show is aired and recorded for our podcast weekly. On today's program, we will be playing a presentation delivered by Penny Hess, chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people formed by and working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to build solidarity with the anti-colonial struggle for African liberation and reparations. Penny Hess joined the African People's Solidarity Committee at its founding conference in 1976 and has for the last 45 years worked under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela to build white solidarity with Black power. Chairwoman Penny is also the author of Overturning the Culture of Violence and a regular presenter on this very podcast for our White Lies Shattered series. Today's presentation was recorded on April 17th, 2021 at the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's National Convention, which was titled Make Wall Street Pay Reparations. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement is the mass organization of white people formed by and working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and its leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. USM's mission is to organize in the white community to build a mass movement for white reparations to African people in the form of political and material solidarity with the African community-led struggle for African liberation, self-determination, and national liberation. This presentation by Penny Hess gives an overview of the solidarity movement for reparations and explains why it is and must be under African working-class leadership. At a time of profound crisis for colonial capitalism, Chairwoman Penny lays out the reasons why organizing for reparations and solidarity with Black power is in our genuine self-interests as white people who want to stand on the forward side of history and unite with the majority of humanity. For more information about the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, you can visit uhurusolidarity.org. That's uhurusolidarity.org. We now go to Penny Hess at the opening of the Make Wall Street Pay Reparations Convention of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement 2021.
I want to join the salute made by Chair Jesse, saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, our leader, Deputy Chair Onazine Yeshitela, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, born in Congo, and organizing on the continent of Europe and in Africa, Chair Tafari Mugeri, organizing in occupied Azania, in Gauteng province, organizing the state of Azania as well as the continent of Africa, and President Kalambai and Tajarwa, who will be on today, who have been incredible, ran an incredible campaign building the social movement here in St. Louis, Director Akile, National Director of Organization Chimurenga, and all the members of the National Central Committee of the party. I salute you, and I think that, I want to state that it is incredibly important that we acknowledge our leadership and that people can see that the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party are real people who make it happen, who put it on the ground, who are in the heart of the African working class, building, organizing, summing up under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And to say that as members of the African People's Solidarity Committee, that we work under the leadership of the Office of Deputy Chair Onazine Yeshitela, who has built the Black Power blueprint and the more than 50 institutions for self-determination of the African People's Socialist Party. And that everything that you want to know about what the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, stands for is right there on the pages of the Burning Spear newspaper that is edited by Director Akile Anai. And it's out every month, out there for the people to see, and the reflections, both politically and organizationally, of this incredible worldwide movement. So we welcome you. We welcome you coming from the white community to be here in a movement that is led by the fierce bias on the side of the African working class, the leadership of the African working class. And from the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the African People's Solidarity Committee, which I have the honor of being the chair, we are white people under the direct leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Everything that we do, all of our work is accountable to the National Central Committee of the party. And we want to be able to show you and continue to build a movement of white people who can begin to see the world through the eyes of the African working class. We want to challenge all the ideas that any of us may have had or still have in our brains that come from this system of colonialism and parasitic capitalism, white power, that has elevated us to the role of the colonizer at the expense of the people on the planet Earth. We want to win, and we want to show you today, and we will. And Chairman Omali Yeshitela is going to be speaking right after me, that we can understand the world through African internationalism, to see that the critical key question in the whole world today is the question of colonialism. And that is what is being brought to the surface everywhere we are, based on the incredible resistance of African people, of oppressed people around the world, and based on the political and organizational leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party. So we can get to the way things are and understanding how things got to be the way they are, and what it will take for the world and for us to be part of a future under the leadership of African people, under the leadership of the colonized, fighting for power and national liberation over their lives, and to be able to abandon our allegiance and our relationship to this white ruling class that is the enemy of the people on the planet Earth. And this is a time of resistance, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown us. This is a time when white people are being called to task, to stand up, to take responsibility, to pay reparations, to stop laying in the cut, to stop our complicity with this system and our ability to carry out the will of the colonial state with impunity. That we have to recognize our history, and we have to take it on by rectifying our stand. So this is a call and an opportunity for white people to be something more than just another indebted white people looking to make it in the system. This is because this is a time of crisis in this social system, and we have seen, and we do see, the continuous ongoing police and colonial violence against African people, the police murders, and all the other ways that there are two Americas, that there are two relationships to this state experienced in this country, one at the expense of the other. And that we want to talk about what it is that distinguishes the Uhuru movement and the Uhuru Solidarity movement from everything else. And so I want to say that the African People's Solidarity Committee was formed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela in 1976. Yes, almost 45 years ago, as part of the process of the party of carrying out a multifaceted strategy to win the total liberation of Africa and African people, regardless of what it takes, to say that African people will be free and self-governing again. And again, the African People's Socialist Party represents the interests of the African working class, whether in North St. Louis, whether in Chicago, or whether in the continent of Africa itself, the Caribbean, forced into Europe, or any other place where African workers have been forced out through this vicious colonial system. And in 1960s, the movement for Black power erupted inside the US, and it was part of a worldwide struggle of African and oppressed people for national liberation around the world. As we know, Cuba was winning, Vietnam was winning, defeating US colonialism all throughout the continent of Africa. African people were fighting against the colonial domination that had oppressed and built the world system of capitalism, and that inside the borders of the United States, inside the belly of the beast, the center of world imperialism, we see this incredible movement led by the African working class that also galvanized all other oppressed indigenous and colonized peoples inside this border to stand up against US imperialism, and that the US government itself recognized that this struggle, as the chairman has shown us, was the greatest internal threat to the US government since ever. And that in 1966, Chairman Omali Yeshitela was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in St. Petersburg, Florida. He tore down this incredibly vicious colonial mural depicting African people in hideous caricature that had hung in City Hall for 30 years, right visible to everybody who came in to see it. The chairman, as part of a movement of the uprising of young African people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, went into City Hall, tore down that mural. The chairman was sentenced to 5 years in prison and spent the next many years in and out of prison based on that sentence and also his organizing in African communities throughout Florida and throughout the South in particular. And that 50 years before a mass movement, as we see it today, demanded that colonial statues and other representatives of colonial power in this country be torn down, the chairman had already torn down that mural. And of course, the city of St. Petersburg has never apologized that, never often offered reparations, but that was a critical act of the Black Power movement, the first act of the Black Power movement of the 1960s that galvanized the struggle for power led by the African working class. And the chairman, by 1970, Chairman Omali Yeshitela had summed up, it's not enough to protest, that African people had to seize power, that he was determined to take the slogan popularized in the 1960s of the Black Power and to make that a reality in which African people struggle for power over their lives. And that was the only answer, because otherwise Chairman Omali Yeshitela would be facing today, when the conditions of African people in many ways are worse than they were in the 1960s. And the chairman was forced to sum up what the questions were, what were the critical questions that the movement had to understand, and that we have to understand, that it was the assault on Africa, the theft of African human beings, turning African people into commodities, into things with price tags on them, to machines, to a means of production, to labor, turning humanity from Africa into commodities and that produce the monetary value for white people who can act as the state to maintain white power. And that it was this assault on Africa, the theft of Africa's resources, the theft of African human beings, the enslavement of African people on stolen land, of the indigenous people where genocide had been perpetrated against them as a mass popular campaign of the general white population. This is what built the wealth. This is what transformed, as the chairman has shown us, Europe from feudalism into capitalism. This is the birth of capitalism. This isn't a bad thing that capitalism did. This was the essence of capitalism. And on the heels of the assault on Africa, the genocide against the indigenous people, basically the colonization of the entire world that made Europe and white people the richest, most powerful system on this planet for the last 500 or 600 years. So capitalism was born parasitic. The fact that there is desperate poverty among African people, among oppressed and colonized peoples around the world, and prosperity and opportunity and democratic rights and social wealth for white people is a dialectic, as the chairman says, an inescapable dialectic between white people and the rest of the world. And this is the critical question. The chairman defined colonialism. He said the problem is not racism. You don't fight the symptoms. White people are the colonizers. Colonialism means the occupation of a whole people by a foreign and alien state power for profit. That happens as much as US and British colonialism, French colonialism around the world as it does inside the borders of the United States. And if we don't see the ongoing colonial police murders of African people for what it is, we are missing the central contradiction. But this movement, led by the African People's Socialist Party, forces us to confront the world as it is and what it will take to change it. So we are the damn colonizers. We are the colonizer nation. This is the basis when people say white privilege or racism. This is the basis for these ideas. This is the material and organizational understanding, the reality, the material reality behind these ideas in our heads. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown us that, and shown us that we as white people can understand this and can begin to take responsibility for it. And that we have to look at what we have carried out as the colonizer nation, that we have perpetrated unspeakable violence against the African population over and over and over again through the decades of the lynching, the terror, the burning of whole towns. Any time that African people accumulated wealth, accumulated any kind of self-determination, it was attacked and overturned, not just by the state, but by regular white people carrying out the violence of the state with impunity, never brought to trial for that, always by persons unknown. And the chairman has defined the assassinations and the destruction of the movement in the 1960s as a counterinsurgency, the war without terms, that the US imperialism and world imperial and European imperialism carry out against all oppressed and colonized people who rise up in their struggle and their movement to be free and to be liberated, such as the US war against Vietnam, the French the war against the people of Algeria, and that inside the borders of the United States, there was also a counterinsurgency that destroyed the organization, that assassinated the leaders, that imprisoned African people, and that the chairman has defined the question of reparations as a revolutionary demand, not as an issue being voted on by the Congress, although it's good that these questions are out there so that it's on the table. But this, in 1982, the African People's Socialist Party held the first tribunal on reparations to African people, using international law to indict the US government for genocide against African people, for the colonizing of African people, and for the right of African people's struggle for power over their lives to be heard on the world court, with the resolution, the conclusion from that tribunal that the United States government owed in 1982 $4.1 trillion in stolen labor alone inside the borders of the United States, and the colonization and domination of the majority of humanity, beginning with the African population inside this country and around the world. We can see that everything is owed, that it is a revolutionary demand, and that we have a job in the African People's Solidarity Committee. We have an assignment to, as the chairman says, to go behind enemy lines, to win our families, our friends, to go inside the white population as the voice of Black power in white face, to bring and extend the African revolution into the belly of the beast. This is our job, to unleash those stolen resources, to be able to take responsibility for who we are and show other white people that our truest interest is in genuine solidarity with African people and the people on the planet Earth. Because as Chairman Omali Yeshitela describes it, the African Revolution is about the liberation of all oppressed and colonized peoples. We have a choice. We have a choice. We have the ability to stand with the oppressor or to turn loose our whiteness and to pay reparations. Paying reparations is not, it's not a punishment. It's our redemption. It's our ability to make our self-criticism to African people, enjoying the humanity of the entire earth, and to be part of the whole struggle that is going to rid this world of this vicious, violent, white power, capitalist, parasitic system, and build a world in which all human beings can live, no one at the expense of everyone else. We have a responsibility to make our ruling class pay reparations, and that in this world, again, we can rectify our relationship to African people, we can end our self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world, and we can find our redemption under the leadership of the African Revolution. We can do this. Let's build this movement for reparations to African people. Let's go out there. We already have members in nearly 150 cities. We need to be all over. This year, we're going to be building on the continent of Europe and Africa in terms of white people taking this stand under the leadership of the African Revolution.
You're listening to Reparations in Action.
Reparations now!
This has been an episode of Reparations in Action, the White Lies Shattered series, a biased podcast of white solidarity with Black power. My name is Jamie Simpson. This episode was engineered by Marcel Marius, who also composed our theme music. The show is researched and produced by Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, and Lisa Watson from the Black Power 96.3 FM studio in St. Petersburg, Florida. A shout out to Akile Anayi and DJ Eddie Maltzby, as well as the entire Reparations in Action team, Sandra Forrest, Johan Bedingfield, Amanda Carlozzi, Kyle Weiss, Marissa Ricchetti, Ali Aiello, Alana Woods, Declan Keller, Hallie Murray, and Sarah Rittersbach. If you liked what you heard today, you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate this podcast. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, please email them to us at ria@blackpower96.org. Special thanks to the African People's Socialist Party's chairman Omali Yeshitela, without whose leadership and theory of African internationalism, none of the understandings presented on Reparations in Action would be possible. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.